Okay. Hello again. Sorry about getting cut off like that. My memory got overloaded on my camera because I wasn't paying attention to it. So let's pick up here. This is History 231, Ancient Mediterranean World, and we are still here on lecture number 17, the founding of the Roman Empire. And I was talking about Octavian Augustus, who at this time in history is the most wealthy and powerful man in the world. So he's quite an impressive character, but he's got a lot on his plate. And so he does a number of things, and I mentioned last time that of course he did things like making adultery illegal for women and all that, and then of course you find that his question of the senators, and he uses the senators basically to manage affairs in various provinces of the empire, with the exception of Egypt. And Egypt, as I said, is very wealthy, and he keeps it his own personal property so he can finance his various and sundry plans and schemes and this sort of thing. And so this is what he does. Now again, he's also very smart. He says, I'm only going to use my formal powers, the power that I have because I am the emperor. I can pretty much do what I want, sparingly. And this is, again, a wise thing to do. If you have a lot of power, only use it when you need it. Don't just throw it around. Right? This is particularly true given the Romans did have that bugaboo about people seizing power, and he's aware of this. So this is something that you find this as well here. And so Augustus, here I will call him Augustus, Octavian and Augustus, again, the same guy here. And this is what he does. So he sets out, okay, we're going to have to figure a way to get all these former soldiers busy working, and what he does is he starts massive building projects. Rome is turned into a showpiece of imperial power. The city of brick, they say, became a city of marble. All sorts of amazing monuments and stuff go up, and a lot of them are just bling. They're eye candy, temples and things like that. They look nice, and maybe they have some function, but the main reason is to put people to work, because not only do you build the temple, you got to maintain the temple, and that gives people jobs, and people who have jobs are less likely to make trouble and mischief and problems here. And so this is what we find. Another thing that he does is sets up a little thing called the Praetorian Guard. Now, the Praetorian Guard is basically a bodyguard for the emperor, right? They are stationed in Rome, and they are there to keep the emperor safe, make sure everything's okay. Because keep in mind, when people have this kind of power, they are big targets. The President of the United States, whoever's in charge of Russia, whoever's in charge of China, these people need serious bodyguards because they are very big targets. All right? I do remember some years ago, President Obama came to Central Connecticut State University, and I thought, oh, I'll go hear President Obama. I'll go see President Obama. No. All right, I was able to get maybe a quarter mile away from where President Obama was. I was nowhere near President Obama. You had to have special permission to get past the security. All right, and that is normal. That is true of all presidents. That's true of any head of a major power, because these people are targets, and these people, if they get hit, something happens to them, it can be bad for a lot of people. Okay, so this is something we have to keep in mind. And this is what he has. He has the Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor, to protect things, and also to make sure Rome doesn't go crazy. The Praetorian Guard are on call in Rome to keep Rome safe, keep Rome from getting nuts and out of control and all this sort of things here, all right? And so this is what he does. Now, the next thing, of course, he does is he doesn't necessarily make everything Rome controls into a part of the empire. He uses what are called client states. Now, client states are theoretically independent, but their rulers, their kings or whoever, do what the big king says. And so if the Emperor of Rome, if Augustus says, I want you to do this, they'll say, yes, sir, and they'll salute, and off they go. All right, and so this is what we find here. So he has these client states in some parts of the empire, and this is going to be true as well, including in Judea, as we will see. So this is something we will see. Keep in mind, believe it or not, there's still fighting going on in Spain. There's still parts of Spain the Romans haven't conquered yet. They've been trying for centuries to conquer Spain, and those dang Spaniards keep fighting back. So they're still having to deal with that. So you got to have a military presence in Spain here. To the north of the empire, the Germans. Oh, those Germans are up there, and they are running around bungling against the border, bashing into things, plundering, causing problems. You got to put an army up there. So you got to have legions stationed in Spain. You got to have legions stationed against Germany. The border with Germany is very long, and the fact is there's just no way you're going to ever subjugate the Germans. It's just not going to happen. There's too many, and the area is too big. All right, and so they tried. They had one example where they sent a whole bunch of legions across the border into Germany to stop the Germans, to hassle the Germans, and those 3 legions were literally wiped off the face of the earth. It was a massive military defeat for the Romans during this time. It's one of the few times we're told that our friend Augustus, Octavian Augustus, actually kind of broke down. He's like, oh my God, he kind of freaked out about it. This guy did not freak out easily. So this was a very bad kind of thing here. All right. Now, obviously, to the east, you have the Parthian Empire. That's a stable border. You can negotiate with the Parthian king, and assuming you both keep your word, which is always kind of an assumption, but assuming you both keep your word, the eastern border can be relatively stable. But the Parthians, remember, want nothing more than access to the Mediterranean. So they're always a potential problem over there. You got to plant legions over there. And this is actually one of the reasons that Judea, with the Jews, is such a problem for the Romans, because the Romans have to control it to keep the Parthians out. So that's an interesting sort of thing. So now let's talk about what kind of a guy was Octavian Augustus. What sort of a fellow was he? He was one of these guys who does change history. He's one of those rare people who really changes history. So what kind of a guy was he? Well, let's talk just a little bit about him. Number one, he's not a military genius. He's no Alexander the Great. He's no Hannibal. All right? He's a political genius, and he's smarter than either of them was about politics. This guy is really good at politics. I mean, very, very clever guy when it comes to politics here. He's extremely disciplined. Right? Very disciplined in the way he behaves. He has a general temperament of being fairly conservative. He doesn't like radical new changes, this guy doesn't. He likes things kind of steady as you go here. All right? He also lives fairly modestly. Considering he's the richest, most powerful man who has ever lived, he lived reasonably modestly. Okay, he wasn't living in a hovel, but he was living in a reasonably comfortable but not extravagant palace. So this guy lives reasonably comfortably. All right? And we're told he seemed kind of distant to people. He seemed a bit distant towards people, and this was very interesting. He's a very reserved guy. So you talk to him, and he just, He didn't get emotional very quickly or easily. A few times, yes. All right, when those legions were lost, apparently he was like, oh my God, kind of freaking out. But it's rare for this guy to show much emotion. All right, he's not a terribly emotive sort of fellow. Now, here's the interesting thing, all right? And I've always found this kind of amusing. In spite of the fact that he said, hey, listen, no adultery, he committed adultery. But the reason he committed adultery has always amused me. He didn't commit adultery because, oh, hey, that guy's wife is really sexy. He committed adultery to find out what the guy was up to. So you can imagine the pillow talk of our friend Octavian Augustus, snuggling up with some rich senator's wife or something like that. So, honey, what does your husband think about the budget? He uses adultery to get information about other guys, people that he rivals or potential problems for this guy. He didn't commit adultery because he had a lust issue. It was a political calculation to commit adultery for this guy. Which is, again, ironic because, of course, he'd said adultery is a no-no, but who's going to say no to this guy, right? So anyway, I've always thought pillow talk for Octavian Augustus was a really strange thing, all right? But this is what he does here. He does this kind of thing here. We get a sense of this guy being cold, calculating. He might have kind of been a psycho, a sociopath, a psychopath, a little bit. Not an extreme one, not a Hitler or a guy like that who's a complete psychopath, but just not like the rest of us, right? Not like the rest of us. Not necessarily someone you're always comfortable with, right? But there he is, right? There he is here. Now, he does have one big problem. That was a problem that vexed him his entire career, and that is the issue of succession. He is acutely aware that the entire Roman Empire hinges on him. If he has a stroke or a heart attack or falls off his horse, the whole thing falls apart. It's all dependent on him. Which was similar in a way to what happened with Alexander. And of course, we saw how with Alexander didn't care. He wanted to party with his boyfriend, he wanted to conquer stuff, and when he died, he didn't really care what happened. Well, Octavian's the opposite. He cares deeply about what's going to happen when he's gone. And so the issue of succession is a big deal for our friend Octavian Augustus. A very, very big deal. So what does he do? He says, what we need to do is have the next emperor get trained in advance. We need to have someone solid we know is going to take over when I'm gone, and this guy has got to be trained in advance. So we've got to find a really solid guy. And so how does he go about doing this? Well, I need an heir, he says. I need an heir. And so what he does, right, what he does is he takes his daughter, a young lady named Julia. Now, we've already met one lady named Julia, and she, of course, had been the wife of Pompey, and they'd been in love, and it was really kind of romantic in its twisted way because Pompey was a butcher, but hey, there it is. This is a different Julia, okay? This is a different Julia, not the same Julia that Pompey had married and all that. Remember, she had died in childbirth, and that had been very bad for poor Pompey, all right? Not to mention her. This is a different Julia. This is Octavian Augustus's daughter, Julia. And this poor lady, I've always felt badly for poor Julia. And I want to just take a moment to give her a little bit of credit here, all right? Because here's what Dad did. Now, you ladies in the class can imagine. What happens if your father says, listen, dear, you're going to marry my business partner. You're going to marry my friend. You're going to marry all my buddies because I need an heir. And this is what Octavian does to her. This is what Augustus does to his own daughter. He says, honey, you're marrying who I tell you to marry, and you're going to squeeze out a whole lot of babies, and one of them is going to be the next emperor. Don't argue with me. Right? This is what he does to his own daughter. He basically, and I hate to be blunt about this and look crude, but he pimps his daughter out for political gain. This is what he does. Now, you can imagine Julia was not happy about this. I can't imagine anyone being happy about this kind of behavior by their own father. And so she figured out how to get revenge. And the way she gets revenge is really pretty cold-blooded. Maybe it went in the family. All right, here's what she does. She became known as the easiest girl in Rome. What she does when her father starts marrying off to all these different guys trying to make an heir is she starts having affairs, public, lewd affairs with as many guys as she can. She became known as the easiest girl in Rome. Right? And this is precisely the time her husband is pushing family values. This was the thing she could do to her father. She could push this on her own dad and just wreck his plans. And that's what she sets out to do. And you know, I can't blame her for being pissed off at her dad, because quite frankly what he did to her was really nasty. All right? It got so bad that finally, after she has affair after affair after affair, he had to just exile her out of Rome, get her out of the public eye, get her out of sight. You can't imagine what this woman would have done to her father if it had been the internet age. Oh my God, I hate to think, all right? But I've always felt badly for poor Julia. She deserved better than what her dad did to her. But this is the kind of guy he is. This guy is not always a nice guy. And this is his own daughter, so ugh. But anyway, there's our poor friend Julia. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? All right, you can't get yourself, it doesn't work. He's unable to get an heir, and he knows he needs one because he's getting older. So what he finally does is he adopts a guy he trusts. He says, okay, I know you're about my age, maybe a little younger, but about my age, and I'm going to adopt you, and I'm going to make you my heir, and that way we're going to do it. And the guy he adopts is a fellow named Tiberius, and Tiberius gets himself a star. He's the second emperor of Rome. And Tiberius is a pretty solid kind of guy. All right, and Octavian Augustus says, I think this guy will work. And when Octavian Augustus finally gives up the ghost and he finally dies, all right, power transfers smoothly. So it seems to work. And I say seems because, well, history shows us it didn't always. But in this case, it transfers over. Power transfers to Tiberius here. So what I'd like to do now is talk briefly here about Parthia. Remember, Parthia is over there to the east of Rome, and the Parthians are Rome's single biggest problem because, of course, the Parthians want nothing more than access to the Mediterranean Sea. And so what they're doing is constantly pressing against the Roman border. They're constantly pressing, sometimes militarily, but oftentimes it's just pressure, all right? Just pressure. And the Romans always have to keep an eye on the east. Always have to keep an eye on the east. But here's the thing. All right, here's the thing. That means the Jews, Judea, is going to be stuck in the middle. Judea during this period is a very interesting place to study. It's a very interesting kind of situation over there because the Romans are like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to manage Judea? How do we deal with Judea? Well, they could rule it directly, they do that in some places, or they could use client kings, client states. And the one thing the Romans had when it came to Judea was they had a problem, and that is that the Jews have this really strange idea that there's only one God. They're monotheists. There's only one God. Well, the Romans are like, well, but everyone knows there's a whole bunch of gods. I mean, what are you guys, nuts? This is crazy. Right? So there's a cultural difference between the Romans and, of course, the Greeks before them and the Jews. And this had led to conflict after conflict after conflict. And the Romans were like, okay, clearly we're going to have to be very careful how we handle Judea. It's too important to just let it go, because Parthia is right there, and Parthia would love nothing more than to take control of Judea. Oh my gosh, that would be great for them, right? They'd get access to the Mediterranean. So the Romans have to control Judea. They have no choice. They have to control Judea. But there's that monotheism, polytheism thing, and the Romans are like, I don't know how to deal with this. So what they do is they say, okay, well, here's what we'll do. We're going to pick, right? We're going to pick some Jewish guy, and he'll be the king of Judea, but he'll answer to us. So he'll take care of all this weird monotheism stuff, and we will run things in the big picture. That was the thing they attempted to do. All right? But of course, this was a problem. You'll remember the Hasmonean kings, right? The Hasmonean kings had broken away from Greek domination for precisely the reason they said, hey man, you Greeks are polytheists, you guys are weirdos, we don't want anything to do with you. All right? So the Hasmonean kings are around up till 64 BC, and the Romans have to figure out how they're going to handle their new conquest. And so what they do is they say, okay, what we need to do is get some guy, somebody we really know we can trust, someone we can rely on, but who's also Jewish, right? And he'll know how to handle the Jews and will be in charge. And this is one of the things they do. And so they tried various things, and one of the guys that they picked, and he gets a star, is a fellow named Herod, the famous Herod the Great. And Herod the Great, well, he's an interesting character. All right, he's Jewish. His family ancestry was originally not from Judea. They had actually been forced to convert. In the rare times that Jews had ever forced anyone to become Jewish, his family, his ancestors, had been forced to become Jewish. But he's Jewish. He's Jewish. And the Romans say, maybe we can trust him, because Herod was clever. Herod was clever. He had figured a way to get the Romans to like him. All right, to get him to like him and give him backing and power. And he's telling the Jews, listen, guys, maybe we should all get with the program. You know, the Romans, they're okay. And he tried to push a pro-Roman agenda on the Jews, and he himself is Jewish, and he figured maybe this would work. And he built a lot of things. He used that whole thing about building stuff as a way to get people to like you. So he built all sorts of stuff in Judea. And if you go to Israel today, there are tons and tons of ruins of stuff that Herod the Great built. This is why they call him the Great. He built all sorts of things. And he's trying to push this agenda of let's cooperate with Rome. Let's cooperate with Rome. Let's get along with Rome here. All right? Is this going to work? Well, some Jews are like, yeah, you know, I think he's got a point. Maybe we should do this, because let's face it, there are real advantages economically and so forth with cooperating with the Romans. On the other hand, the Romans were, and how do I put this nicely, not always what we call culturally sensitive. They thought the Jews were weird, and many of them thought, you know, what we need to do is build a bunch of temples to, you know, Jupiter and places like this and get the Jews on board. And so there was this pressure, this constant tension between the Romans and the Jews. And of course, it didn't get helped that at this exact same time, the Jews are busy being pissed off at each other. They're fighting with each other. You've got various Jewish groups who hate each other. And this is actually kind of interesting, because if you ever watched the Monty Python movie Life of Brian, there's a wonderful, wonderful scene in there. Because the guys who do Monty Python, these are smart, smart guys. They really did their research. And Life of Brian is perhaps the most historically accurate movie I've ever seen about ancient Judea, which is really kind of ironic, because it also has things like space aliens, and of course it's completely ridiculous. But the jokes are deep. These guys had done the research. And they have one scene where the Jewish guys are saying, we hate the Romans. Oh my gosh, we hate the Romans. Oh, they're horrible. They're horrible. The only people we hate worse than the Romans. And then they start listing other Jewish groups. And this actually was true. These Jewish groups hated each other a lot. And they were always ready to fight with each other. This was a very tense time in Judea. And I want you to understand that, because it is in this environment that a fellow named Jesus is going to operate. And when we get to Christianity and the rise of Christianity and Jesus, he's going to be a player. He's going to be active during this time period of immense tension within the Jewish community and immense tension against the Romans themselves. And that means Judea was a ticking time bomb. Judea was a ticking time bomb. There were radical terrorists. We call them zealots. And the zealots were violent, apocalyptic lunatics. They really were. They were scary people. And they were convinced that all sorts of huge divine violence was going to come crashing down, and they were ready to have it happen. All right? And this is what the Monty Python guys were kind of having a little fun with. They were poking fun at the zealots because, of course, the zealot groups hated each other, and they also hated other Jewish groups, right? They also hated other Jewish groups. They hated the Pharisees. They hated the Sadducees. The Pharisees and the Sadducees didn't get along. All these different Jewish groups were in conflict, and so Judea is a ticking time bomb. And just in case you think I'm exaggerating, the time bomb would eventually go off. And when it goes off, the results are absolutely catastrophic. So, we have zealots, extremists, radicals, kind of crazy. All right? We have Pharisees, and the Pharisees believed we need to follow religious rules, religious laws. That's the way we ought to go. We shouldn't focus on this world as much as we focus on just the divine, what God wants. All right, and this is the way they think. The Sadducees say, no, what we got to do is cooperate. We got to just sort of mellow out. Now, the Sadducees were often wealthy. And there's one thing about wealthy people I've always noticed is they're much more likely to want things to sort of stay the same. This is one of the reasons that wealthy people and conservatives are often the same thing, all right? Because if you're doing really well, you've got a lot of money and you're comfortable, you got a nice house and a nice car and all sorts of goodies, you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to rock the boat. And so the Sadducees are kind of these guys. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to mess with the way things are going here. Another group that we also find during this time are called the Essenes, and the Essenes are very, very interesting. These were guys who took a look at the situation in Judea and said, this is crazy. And they just moved out. They just left. They went out and lived in the hills. All right, they just went out and lived in the hills. They rejected life in the city. They rejected mainstream life. And this is something that you see from time to time in many human cultures. People who just say, I've had it. I don't want to deal with this stuff. I'm leaving. And they just go out and they live in the hills. And the Essenes are particularly interesting because one of the Essene groups, and there were several, one of the Essene groups is responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls. And hopefully you've all heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the most amazing and important finds, archaeological finds in history. All right, the Essenes were the ones, one of these Essene groups was responsible for this as well. All right, and then finally what we have are what are called the Hellenistic Jews. The Hellenistic Jews were the Jews who said, you know what, Greek culture is kind of cool, which of course it is. It is kind of cool. Maybe we can work out a compromise between Judaism and, of course, Greek culture, and therefore Roman culture as well. And these guys were also present not just in Judea, but also in places like Alexandria. And you remember, of course, Alexandria had been founded by Alexander, and a lot of Jews lived there. A lot of Jews lived in lived in Egypt, all right? And so you have Jews really moving all over as the Romans come in. They start migrating out. And what is really kind of interesting, all right, is that the guys who are responsible for what is called the Septuagint were, in fact, these Hellenistic Jews. All right? Now, the Septuagint is a huge deal. It is a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, and it was done by these guys. All right, it was done by these Hellenistic Jews, and it was done during the time when the Ptolemies controlled Egypt, and it is a translation of the Hebrew Bible that we have today. And what makes the Septuagint particularly interesting and important is this. We can compare the Septuagint to the Hebrew Bible that we have now, and they're almost the same. Almost. But they're not quite. There are some differences, and what this tells us is that when the Septuagint was translated, there was not a single Hebrew Bible. There were probably multiple Hebrew Bibles, and the one we have today is one of them. The Septuagint came from a slightly different version. So it's a very important thing, the Septuagint, and a very important thing for scholars today to have. So, a ticking time bomb, I said. A ticking time bomb, and this eventually, well, it's going to go off. The time bomb goes off. And it goes off basically in 68 AD or so. I suck at dates, be careful. But about 68 or 69 AD. a rebellion of the Jews against the Romans, a massive rebellion. And remember, the Jews were really good at fighting. They were actually very good soldiers, very good at war. And so the Romans have their hands full. And as we'll see, the Romans also had some other problems at the same time because the emperors had had some problems, and we're not sure who the emperor is. It was a crazy time. It was a crazy, crazy time, and the Jews rebelled. Right? They rebelled. And the Romans eventually put down the rebellion. And when they put down the rebellion, things got out of hand. And the temple to God, the temple to Yahweh in Jerusalem was destroyed in the fighting. All right? It was destroyed in the fighting in 70 AD. And when it gets destroyed in the fighting, it's the end of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Today, the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem is the last piece of this temple that still exists. The rest of it is gone. It was totally destroyed. And the Jews have, Jerusalem gets sacked, loot gets carried off to Rome, and if you want to go to Rome, you have a chance to go and see some of the loot. The Romans put up a picture of them schlepping some of this loot out of Jerusalem, and it was a really serious mess. It was a serious, serious problem. So the Jews, well, they had a heck of a time, because this is the first of about 3 major revolts, after which the Jews are scattered by the Romans. And this begins a Jewish diaspora that remained in place until the 20th century with the founding of the State of Israel. The founding of the State of Israel. And of course, what's happened since Israel was founded is a lot more excitement in the Middle East, and I really hope that the Israelis and the Palestinians can work out their differences in a peaceful way, because I'd be honest with you, I've met Israelis, I've met Palestinians, they're really nice people, and I like them both. But this is where the modern conflict comes from. The return of the Jews to Israel is a return because the Romans had kicked them out a couple of thousand years ago. And so this means that history today is directly impacted by what happened back a couple of thousand years ago in Judea when the Romans came in and took it. But remember, the Romans, they didn't know how to handle the Jews. They didn't know how to handle the situation in Judea because, quite frankly, that monotheism thing, they were never able to work that out, and they were never able to get over their sort of nasty character of trying to control this region. But remember, the Romans had no choice. If they want to control this part of the world, they got to control Judea, because the Parthians, the Persians, are just itching to get in and get access to the Mediterranean Sea. So the poor Jews are caught in the middle between these two powerful empires and their ambitions here. All right, and that brings us to an end for this lecture, and we will pick up the next lecture next time. So be safe and be well, and I will see you all then.